crypto's having a great start to the week as we are watching Bitcoin pop back above $88,000 a coin. You got Arthur Hayes, a voice that a lot of people in the space respect, and he's saying that it's more likely that you have Bitcoin hitting 110,000 before it retests 76.5. In a follow-up tweet, Arthur Hayes was talking about if you get past 110, then you're on a rocket ship, if you really think about kind of repricing these things. This week, we've got big news when it comes to Trump's pick for SEC chair, Paul Atkins. It's in line with when we saw the other SEC chairs get confirmed. This could potentially be even earlier, but not unless Senator Elizabeth Warren comes through with what she has to say. Welcome, everybody, into another episode of Coinage. I'm your host, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios here in New York City. Hope you had a great weekend. Right now, crypto's having a great start to the week as we are watching Bitcoin pop back above $88,000 a coin for the first time in about 2 weeks plus. Not since early March have we seen these numbers, and on today's show, we're going to get into the big reasons as to why we might be seeing that move and why many people in crypto are starting to think that the bottom is in for the next stage of this rally. Could 150K be in play? Who knows? We're going to get into that. Of course, we've talked a lot on this show, including all the way back in January, about 175 being one of the price targets that we here at Coinage give most of our sentiment to and our understanding too, but not just price on today's show, of course. If you watch this show, you know we don't always just chat price. A lot of policy things to get into coming off of our exclusive. Was it exclusive? Who knows anymore? Off our interview with SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, a lot to dive into with that one. Per usual, she gave some great answers and a lot to read through on the tea leaves there. So we're going to walk through the context of what we heard from Commissioner Peirce in our interview. If you haven't watched it yet, that's up on our YouTube and on our homepage at coinage.media. Go check that one out in full because we're not going to cover everything. Mostly just what she said in pertaining to what we're going to have on Thursday. Big news on Thursday, Trump's pick for SEC chair. Potentially gonna get confirmed in the Senate, but not unless Elizabeth Warren can revive her anti-crypto army. She's got a few things to say in a new letter sent to incoming pick for SEC Chair Paul Atkins that we will get to later on in the show. As I said, a lot to discuss there. Plus, big news on the stablecoin front in terms of that bill coming through Congress, what it's gonna mean, and why potentially it could also be the reason we're seeing Bitcoin pop. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Texas, do we have the full screen on the read, watch, own? Because I'm excited. We've launched this series about meme coins. You know, it's not really where I spend. I do spend some time in the trenches. I want to be very clear. People say, oh, this guy, he came from Yahoo, he came from CNBC. What could he know about the trenches? Sirs and madams, your boy lives in the trenches, okay, from time to time. Now, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but that's why we got the Coinage chat. We got some other people here who live in the trenches. They don't come on the show. Their faces aren't seen, but they're behind the scenes, and they're in the trenches. And we've got some big news to talk about when it comes to read, watch, own. And we made a graphic. Shit's getting crazy. Listen, I'm not going to hype this too much because that's not what I do. I'm a journalist at the end of the day, so this isn't usual for me. But being on this side of the game is actually pretty fun. And now Coinage, whether you want to be on this side of the game or not, the DAO launched a meme coin, so we'll dig into that one later on in the show too. But first, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor on the show today. And if you've been watching the show, you've known they've been our sponsor for the month. Today's episode is brought to you by Stacks. Bitcoin's $1 trillion potential is untapped. Stacks unlocks it. Convert BTC to SBTC and earn up to 5% APY in Bitcoin. No custodians, just trustless DeFi. Your Bitcoin working harder. Bet on Bitcoin's future now with Stacks. And of course, as I say, bet on Bitcoin's future, let's talk about what happened last week. As CoinShares always does, we'll kick off the show with this, the chart of the inflows. And when it comes to crypto investment products, we finally have a bar moving in the right direction. You'll see there snapping about 5 weeks' time of outflows in this latest read, totaling $644 million in inflows across digital asset investment products. Again, the large majority of that is always Bitcoin ETFs, tracking $724 million in inflows. And so that's pretty good. That's exactly what you want to see in terms of investor confidence, institutional confidence coming back in. trying to find a bottom, and that generally means good things on the horizon. Ethereum also, though, if I may point that out, facing heavy outflows, $86 million. That's the heaviest across digital assets to be considered here. While Solana recorded $6.4 million in inflows. So interesting to kind of still see that dichotomy between Solana and Ethereum and Bitcoin as we break down all of those numbers. And again, as I said, some people bottom shopping. As you look at the chart for Bitcoin, this is just the day, but if we back up and look at a 7-day chart, take a look at the week, take a look at the month. Really, the question is, like, can we come back down and retest these lows here in the high 70s? Or potentially, you had some people, we had Matt Hogan on the show saying, look, you could go down to 72.5 potentially in a retest. But you got Arthur Hayes, a voice that a lot of people in the space respect. And he's saying that it's more likely that you have Bitcoin hitting 110,000 before it retests 76.5. And that's interesting to think about from a risk-reward perspective. If you're entering here, and of course, you always got to be careful with the downside, but potentially the upside of 110K. And then if that happens, in a follow-up tweet, which I don't have on the screen right now, in a follow-up tweet, Arthur Hayes was talking about if you get past 110, then you're on a rocket ship, if you really think about kind of repricing these things. And again, it's not a technical show. I'm not a technical analyst, but if you think about some of the fundamental pieces, which we often do and more often talk about on Coinage, which we're going to get into, there are a lot of fundamental reasons why you would be bullish at this point in time. No one really knew when the bottom was going to shake out. If you're looking at the inflows that we just showed and pairing the pieces with where some of the traders' sentiment is, I would say things are looking good. So why are they looking good? Well, let's dig into the next piece, which we often talk about on Mondays, which is Michael Saylor back at it again with his buy. And I'm not saying, you can't really say that a Saylor buy is indicative of whether or not the markets are swaying, because Saylor's always said he's going to be buying the dip. He's going to be buying regardless, actually. And when you look over there, this is the news this time around. And keep in mind, Saylor had this raise before, because he's got not just Monster now, but also the other ticker in this tweet, STRK. And so he's basically working on equity raises all the time. Plus, he's still got the convertible notes that he's doing on the debt side. So again, Saylor is raising a lot of money to buy a lot of Bitcoin. And now that number is passed 506,000 Bitcoin, acquired at an average price of 66,000. The latest buy was almost 7,000 Bitcoin for more than $500,000 at 84,529 a pop. So at 84,529 a pop, he's now in the green as Bitcoin trades north of 88. So that's not a bad turnaround for Michael Saylor too. And of course, I would be remiss too if I didn't point out that more and more people are kind of waking up to the game that Saylor's playing. And it's not, this is one that we've covered before. It's not necessarily the case that he's just yeeting into this with massive leverage and he could get liquidated. It's not that. He's playing a more complicated game with debt raises and equity raises that, yes, do impact the price of both of those things. But if he can pull it off, and that's a big if he can pull it off, the rewards will be massive. And it's not as easy to say, yes, directionally, if it's going down, obviously not good. But it's not as risky as I think some people have made it out to be in terms of the same way that you might get liquidated going 50x leverage, on various retail platforms. It's a little bit different. But very, I think, back into bull times when you see Saylor eating in that much on a Monday, which we've often covered. And it's kind of dried up. It had dried up a little bit. And people were also wondering because the early efforts with the raise didn't look so hot. And the question was that because of market conditions? Was that because of, need a little bit more time? Or was that because people were kind of over this idea of MicroStrategy, or strategy, I should say now, raising money to bet on Bitcoin, and had they gotten too far too fast? Had the bet grown too big? And this is encouraging considering that, okay, obviously their buys are ahead of what we know. And if he's back to buying, that's probably based on the fact that he feels more comfy with their ability to raise and their stated goals of continuing to acquire Bitcoin. And so a lot of people crossing 500,000 Bitcoin, a lot of people saying it won't be too long until Saylor has more than 1 million Bitcoin in Strategy's coffers. So something to pay attention to there. And again, not just Strategy. There are other companies out there now throwing Bitcoin on their balance sheet too, which we will keep an eye on as well. But it's not just Bitcoin. This is kind of where we get into why we think there is a lot to come on reasons to be optimistic around Bitcoin and the price now. And I will shift to stablecoins because this is the big thing this month and next month. I think it's fair to say, well, maybe just April, because March is almost done. April, big month in DC, in Congress when it comes to stablecoins. Of course, as we're going to talk about to wrap up the show, very big month to get the Trump pick for SEC chair to replace Gary Gensler. He's going to have a confirmation hearing on Thursday. We're going to talk about it in a sec. Elsewhere in DC, the big thing is DC finally potentially getting a stablecoin bill across the line. The reason why that's big and the reason why I think a lot of people are front-running that news is because we've seen a few different stories come out over the last few days that have made it more clear that the pro-crypto policy changes are finally about to happen in DC in a big way. And I say in a big way because essentially the green light has been given to a lot of these institutions to now touch this stuff. On Friday, you had the U.S. Treasury lifting sanctions against Tornado Cash. That's the money mixer that a lot of people, have paid a lot of attention to because last year we saw the developers attached to that get into some legal trouble. And, a lot of people are like, hey, if you're not doing anything illegal, why didn't you use a money mixer? And people in crypto will tell you it's because I just don't want the government looking at what I'm doing. And I have that right. And if I want to move my money and people on chain shouldn't see what I'm doing, then hey, that's my right. Get that. At the same time, a lot of criminals do use Tornado Cash, supposedly. And we've seen kind of as a lot of sleuths try to track some of these hacks, money mixers are in play. So yes, protect privacy. Another question, what do you do on the other side? We've seen that play out with the Bybit hack. Very interesting questions. But that's just one thing. The other thing that happened was the OCC smoothing a path for banks to finally touch crypto. This also comes after the SEC got rid of SAB 121, which also blocked banks from touching crypto. And so piece by piece, we're seeing pieces of regulatory agencies in DC start to let banks touch crypto. And when I say touch crypto, I really mean touch stablecoins, because that's what banks really want to touch, which is just a digital dollar that moves quicker than the system they currently have to use, even though the Feds try to push and make that settlement speed much quicker through the Fed's existing traditional banking system. But stablecoins are cheaper and faster. So what are you going to do if you're a bank? You're probably going to say, hey, we need to be able to touch these things. And so banks are playing catch up now. And the government agencies that had previously said, no touchy crypto stablecoins, you can now touchy crypto stablecoins. That's a legal term. And we're seeing a lot more money come in. How much money? I think we've got this little historical chart to show you exactly how much money has come into stablecoins over the years. And of course, I set this up because I think it's really interesting in terms of the battle between Tether and USDC. A lot of people don't care about this, and I understand that because you can't really make money on Tether and USDC in terms of the way that you could have until it collapsed on Terra, UST, and Luna until it collapsed. But very interesting to think about the size of Tether as it's now grown. As you see on this chart, it's extended its lead against USDC. Part of that reason now is because Howard Lutnick, Cantor Fitzgerald, custodies all the treasury assets that Tether holds, is now Trump's Commerce Secretary. And will be writing a lot of the rules when it comes to this, or at least shepherding a lot of the rules when it comes to these things. The other person shepherding the rules is Trump's Treasury Secretary. And if you watched at the White House Crypto Summit, you would have heard him say that they were committed to stablecoins and growing the space. And it's very interesting to think about, considering that that statement happened on the same day that the OCC put out their new letter saying that banks will be able to touch stablecoins. So if you connect those dots, the writing is on the wall. I think this week the market is waking up to how big and how impactful banks touching stablecoins will be as it moves money on chain and then opens a world of possibilities in terms of some of that potentially shifting over into Bitcoin, as is often the case. Take a listen to what Treasury Secretary Bessent said just when he was sitting next to Trump at the White House Crypto Summit.
Much of Treasury's responsibility in this order relates to the tax code and determinations around risk weightings. And I'm here to assure you that we are going to work with the Comptroller of the Currency, the IRS, and we're going to rescind and amend all applicable previous guidance. And we are going to put a lot of thought into the stablecoin regime. And as President Trump has directed that we are going to keep the U.S. the dominant reserve currency in the world, and we will use stablecoins to do that. Thank you.
So the dominant reserve currency in the world, and they're going to use stablecoins to do that. Now, I think the question then becomes, okay, which stablecoins are they going to use to do that? Because we already know it's not going to be a government-issued CBDC. You don't gotta be in crypto to know the Republicans don't want that. And so the question is, okay, will it be Tether? Will it be USDC? Which ones are they going to support? Will there be other ones? Of course, a lot of competition. RLUSD. Let's not forget that one. If you haven't watched our interview with Paolo, by the way, Tether's CEO, highly recommend that one just to kind of get his take on competition and the understanding that he's got Howard Lutnick, big supporter, as Commerce Secretary now, what that battle looks like as Tether down in El Salvador tries to stay on the right side of this bill, because USDC has come out and lobbied and tried to say no stablecoin issuer who's not based in the U.S. should be included. And so the battle's out there in the open, and it's going to be very interesting to see where the stablecoin bill finally ends up, because we've got a lot of markups, again, as I said, scheduled for April. And so Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee, as we saw before this big push, they were all up there with the crypto and AI czar, David Sachs, talking about how important this is to get done in the first 100 days. And we're coming up on that. So April, going to be a huge stablecoin month to watch. But again, when you connect those dots, it's not as boring as it sounds. I know everyone hates stablecoins, but it's important. I swear, it's important. But anyways, let's get into the spicier stuff for now, because it's not just stablecoins we're watching in DC this week. Forget about April. What's happening this week, Zach? This week, we've got big news when it comes to Trump's pick for SEC chair, Paul Atkins. Potentially, I guess I don't need to say potentially anymore. We had talked about, hey, when is he going to have this confirmation hearing? It's scheduled for Thursday now, so we know that. It's going to be on Thursday. We will take it live on Coinage per usual. I think this one's actually going to be pretty interesting because, again, it's kind of pacing to be in line with when we saw Gary Gensler and when we saw the other SEC chair before him. Yes, these are the details. This is it. This is on the Senate banking site. It's in line with when we saw the other SEC chairs get confirmed. This could potentially be even earlier, but not unless Senator Elizabeth Warren comes through with what she has to say, which is interesting because she just sent this letter to Paul Atkins saying, hey, I want written responses by your hearing on Thursday to some of my questions. And we have her letter that she sent, and we'll bring it up mostly because it's interesting in terms of her raising some issues and pointing out some conflicts of interest, because Paul Atkins serves, or at least did serve, I'm sure he's done now if he wants to take this job, as board advisor to the lobbying group, the Digital Chamber. Now, we've had Perry Ann Boring on the show before, so you're familiar with the Digital Chamber. They're one of the largest lobbying groups in crypto to talk about a lot of policies and bills that need to get done to protect the interests of crypto in DC. And Paul Atkins being on that board, Elizabeth Warren saying, hey, you might have some conflict of interests. And further, in regards to that, you might want to answer these questions that I have for you, which are more to, would you commit, as some of the Biden appointees had, to not being part of the revolving door? That is, being a regulator that comes in here and represents a lot of these companies, only to then serve for those interests rather than the public's interest in your role as SEC chair. And so will you recuse yourself? And then after, once you leave, will you commit to not taking jobs at some of those companies within the next 4 years? And this is kind of one of those weird things where I actually do somewhat agree, and I'm sure some of you somewhat agree, with someone who we never agree with being an anti-crypto army leader. Because if you think about it, the swamp knows no bounds, right? The revolving door doesn't care what political party you're with. If you're serving the public and you're building up all this goodwill, and then all of a sudden you go over to the other side, I mean, there is a little bit of, what are we doing? And you're seeing the same thing with Elon Musk calling out a lot of these politicians for how much money they make. It's like, are you trying to protect yourself? Are you representing yourself and these interests, or are you representing the people and what's best for them? And I do respect and understand kind of the idea of trying to prevent that. And so we'll see if that becomes a potential point of conflict in this hearing, because, again, the stakes are pretty high in that most of Trump's picks, pretty sure most, if not all of them, got through like without much issue. certainly was the case with Howard Lutnick. Maybe a few questions thrown at him about Tether, which we just talked about, but not too much there in terms of anyone kind of getting blocked because of things that came up in these confirmation hearings. But we'll cover that on Thursday. I think it'll be pretty interesting. And of course, we just asked SEC Commissioner about a lot of these issues and potentially if she was stalling on certain things. One of those things that we reported on a couple months ago after we chatted with her in December was this idea of them revisiting a lot of things. And now look, I think if you watch our full interview with Hester Peirce, you'll see I am very impressed with what they've been able to do in such a short amount of time. But one of those things that they haven't gotten done is ETH staking. The idea of like people being able to stake ETH through the ETFs. Kind of surprised that it hasn't happened yet. And I asked her if some of those bigger decisions are being stalled or waited on until Paul Atkins can be confirmed to come in as SEC chair, and whether or not that could be because you never want to snatch a victory from the hands of your incoming boss, or any boss for that matter. And here's what she told us. We'll just play Hester Peirce's response to that question and chat on the other side. Take a listen.
Well, I mean, as to the question of whether we hold off on things so that Chairman Atkins, assuming he gets confirmed, will be able to take credit. He's not that kind of person. He's not someone who's looking for credit for himself. He really is someone who cares a lot about the issues. He cares about our capital markets. He cares about getting the regulation right, and that's one of the things I really like about him. And so that I can't speak for him, but I don't think that he would be someone who would say, if you can get something done, wait until I get here. No, he'd say, if you can get it done, get it done.
If you can get it done is the idea there. And so, Commissioner Peirce and Paul Atkins have worked together in a capacity before at the SEC. And so it's not even just that like, hey, you don't want to steal a victory from your incoming boss. It's that you don't want to steal a victory from your incoming boss and your former boss in the same person in Paul Atkins. And so I'm not saying that that's clearly, if Commissioner Peirce is saying that that's not what they're doing, I'm going to take her at her word. But in the rest of the interview, she did kind of highlight where some of the remaining changes are coming next, which again, we've talked about, ETH staking and in-kind redemptions in the Bitcoin ETF, some of those tweaks and what they could do. But we also got her to commit to maybe staying on past her term in the summer, because the big question is her term is set to expire then, but she can stay on a little bit longer if she wants to. And as everyone knows, perhaps no one's a bigger Hester Peirce fan than myself. And so I was basically asking because I'm hoping that she will stay on. And it sounds like she will. Go watch our full interview if you haven't yet. There was one also point, though, that I can't just move on and forget, Texas, before we wrap this show. Because one of the other points was a rare, dare I say, disagreement. Not necessarily a disagreement, but just a thought exercise around meme coins. Because that was one of the other big things that the SEC and the creation of the Crypto Task Force has gotten done, is a memo on meme coins. And the idea of the SEC saying, look, these are not within our jurisdiction. Meme coins are not securities. They're just collectibles that are launched. And so long as you're following the rules, meme coins are kosher. And that's kind of something that we've also seen Gary Gensler basically say, not as clearly, but by not going after many of the meme coins. It became the spot that blew up. And so we asked Hester Peirce about meme coins and whether or not there were any unintended consequences there, and what her big take on meme coins are all about, considering we just saw Trump's meme coin and President Javier Milei's meme coin in Argentina maybe not go so well. Here's what she told us about those. And even now with Trump's meme coin and Milei's, it was very interesting to see people in crypto basically calling and saying, all right, hold on, maybe Chair Gensler might have had a point around consumer protections and the integrity of markets as well, which I think is a very interesting thing to consider now. Because similarly, post-February and the idea of saying meme coins are kosher, or at least that they don't fall under the SEC, it was interesting to kind of see capital formation dry up around meme coins, as if everyone's saying, I don't want to be involved anymore because that's the case.
Well, I mean, I think we shouldn't deny the fact that just because you slap the word crypto on something doesn't mean that problems that we've seen in other areas are not going to crop up here. They could very well. And I think it's also a time for us to remind investors and consumers that you've got to exercise skepticism when you make decisions about what you're putting your money into. You have to think about whether you can afford to lose that money.
And so that's basically it, is that, again, you take the position of we're not going to be a nanny state regulator, but really lean into the idea of people are free to do what they want to do. It's a very interesting kind of pivot, and one that I think a lot of our audience agrees with, but just, again, interesting to think about some of the follow-on effects of what you need to think about when that becomes your policy, and whether or not, I don't know. I think what it does, and this is what I've been talking about for a while now, is that you need to have projects, players in the space, start to talk about things in the way that we ourselves, crypto ourselves, want to see regulated. Because Hester Peirce does have a point. You can't really have the case when things collapse. You've got a lot of people being like, hey, where was the SEC to protect us? Or some people saying, hey, Gary Gensler might have been right. That meme coins are bad for the space, gives crypto a bad look. If all people think crypto is rug pulls and scams, then maybe potentially we shouldn't have those. But if you have the SEC saying, look, we're not going to get involved and shut those down, then who else is it on? And it's really on, I think, the space. And so that's interesting to think about when you think about what we're doing at Coinage. I teased ahead to read, watch, own. And the reason being there is, if you haven't been following, if you haven't watched our 2 episodes on launching a meme coin yet, well, let me tell you, my friends, Coinage has indeed launched a meme coin based off of, here it is on this side, the other shoulder, off of the play button that we got for crossing 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. First off, thank you. Second off, we are celebrating with our community by launching the play button meme coin. And we've got a lot of things planned at Coinage, which I should be clear is Coinage the DAO, which we're a community-owned show. And so this has been a very exciting experiment for us because we have our ownership passes on Ethereum. So if you're watching this and you haven't minted yet, you can co-own Coinage and everything we do here as a legal co-op in the US, which I think is very cool, because this is one of those few experiments where we've already been pioneering read, watch, own, and an emphasis on own, by the way, as a real co-op that you can co-own with us and the co-founder of Netflix by minting an NFT and becoming a member. That is where read, watch, own came from, and why we've been building over 3 years. And if you think about this meme coin and where Coinage came from, we're now sitting here at this weird little experiment where we have play button, which I'm looking at every day as I have now. Turns out when you launch a meme coin, it's kind of like having another baby. And so now we've got the baby of the Ethereum ownership NFTs, right? And those are out there. And now we've got this meme coin play button, which is, according to DexView right now, #1 trending meme coin trading out there, baby. And so I think, again, we're not going to talk to anything on this show specifically about what's coming up and what's planned. But I do just want to reiterate a couple things that we talked about in episode 2, which is this is a transparent experiment to show what can happen when a DAO launches a meme coin versus, I think, a lot of what's happened in the past when we talk about rugs and scams, when individuals are launching meme coins. And this is all about realigning incentives between now we have an Ethereum community, ironically launching and steering a Solana meme coin. So there's a lot of things tied into this experiment. I'm not going to pump it more than I already have in terms of saying, hey, check this thing out, do your own research. Legal disclaimer from our lawyers being that, hey, even though Coinage's DAO is voting on things to do with play button, very clear legal disclaimer that play button is just a meme coin that we launched to celebrate. God, I always get that wrong. This is always going to get wrong. Play the music. Hey, play me out, Texas. It's where? Okay, it's over here. It's just a meme coin that we launched to celebrate our YouTube play button with y'all as a community-owned DAO. It made no sense for me to be the only one to be able to interact and touch this award. And so we are sharing it that way with our community and doing so in a way that I hope is more transparent than everyone else's experience in meme coin land. And I want to thank our friends at Solana who have talked about this and have helped us shepherd this to this point, as well as Anatoly, who has maybe retweeted a couple things, including our latest interview with Hester Peirce. So we're out there. This is week 2. We already went down to the New York Stock Exchange with that thing. The interview about Play Button is coming out on Yahoo Finance in early April, so that is also something for us to look forward to. And more details will be coming out in terms of what we plan to do with that thing and what our community, as they vote on, want to do with Play Button as well. For all those details, you can head to coinage.media to keep up on the biggest headlines in Web3 and co-own this experiment with us, whether you want to do that on Solana or Ethereum now. For everybody here at Coinage, I'm Zach Guzman signing off. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Coinage. We'll see you again soon.